She thought I didn't see what she put in my drink, but little did she know, I was one step ahead. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had been hesitant about attending this family dinner. After my divorce, I tried to keep peace with everyone, even with Olivia, my sister-in-law, who had always carried this quiet resentment toward me. She was beautiful, sharp, and always seemed to know exactly how to make people doubt themselves. She never hid her jealousy well, but she hid it just enough that anyone else could dismiss it as harmless. That evening, I got ready carefully, choosing an outfit that was simple but elegant. I wanted to look calm, approachable, and in control, everything Olivia seemed determined to challenge. When I arrived, the house was warm and smelled like baked bread and roasted vegetables. My brother, Jason, greeted me with a hug, and I tried to focus on him, on the familiar comfort of family, and not on the tension that seemed to hum in the air. Olivia appeared shortly after, gliding in with her perfect smile and perfectly polished nails. She greeted me with an almost too cheerful hug, the kind that felt heavy with intent. I noticed the subtle smirk she tried to hide, a flash of triumph in her eyes, and my stomach sank slightly. I had seen that look before, and I knew it wasn't just the excitement of having family together. It was something else, something calculated. The table was set beautifully, with candles flickering softly and plates lined neatly. As the evening went on, Olivia kept finding small ways to control the situation, placing herself at the head of conversations, steering topics toward me, asking probing questions about my work and my life after the divorce. Her tone was polite, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a challenge I couldn't ignore. I stayed calm, smiling when necessary, responding without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. Then came the moment when she offered me a drink, her hand brushing over mine as she set the glass down in front of me. Something about her gesture felt deliberate, rehearsed. I studied her carefully, pretending to take the glass, but instead, I swapped it with another one I had picked up just a moment earlier. I didn't know exactly what she intended, but I knew she wanted to make me look foolish, to embarrass me in front of the family. And I wasn't going to let that happen. As the dinner continued, I noticed Olivia's behavior change slightly. Her eyes darted toward me more often, a flicker of surprise crossing her face whenever I spoke confidently. I realized she hadn't expected me to notice, hadn't expected me to be prepared. That tiny victory energized me. Beneath the polite conversation and family chatter, I could feel the tension tightening around Olivia, the quiet realization that maybe she wasn't in control tonight. By the time dessert arrived, I knew the evening had already shifted. Olivia had planned something, but it hadn't worked out the way she thought it would. I didn't say anything, didn't show my awareness. I let her pride and her miscalculation do the work for me. The night felt like a small battlefield, one where calm observation and quiet strategy could outweigh malice and scheming. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. As the dinner went on, I started noticing little things that didn't feel right. Olivia kept giving me these sharp, fleeting looks, her eyes glinting in a way that felt more calculating than friendly. She poured me another glass of wine, insisting I drink more than I wanted, and whispered something to my brother, Jason, just loud enough for me to catch a word or two. There was a tension in her movements, a subtle control she tried to exert over the room, and it made my skin prickle. During dinner, the conversation turned to work. I mentioned a new project I had taken on, careful to keep it casual, but Olivia's reaction was immediate. She leaned closer, a fake interest in her voice, but I could see the envy simmering underneath. She tried to steer the topic, making small comments that minimized my achievements while highlighting her own successes. I smiled politely, answering her jabs lightly, but inside I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, the realization that someone I had considered family could harbor such jealousy and cruelty. At one point, Olivia excused herself briefly and returned carrying my glass. I caught a glimpse of her fingers brushing against the rim in a strange way, too deliberate to be accidental. My intuition screamed that she was up to something, and I acted quickly. While she wasn't looking, I swapped the glass with the one I had set aside earlier. No one noticed. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from that rush of clarity, the knowledge that I had prevented whatever she intended. I took a moment to breathe and collected my thoughts. Betrayal in families is different from any other kind. It's subtle, insidious, and painful. The people you trust the most, the ones you open your heart to, can sometimes be the ones who try to hurt you in the quietest, cruelest ways. I reminded myself that no one had the right to disrespect me or manipulate me, and I would not let anyone succeed at it, no matter how close they pretended to be. Throughout the rest of the meal, I stayed alert. I watched Olivia's hands, her expressions, even the way she laughed. There was a tension in the air now, almost electric, and I could feel the shift. She thought she had control, thought I was unaware, but I had already taken the step that kept me safe. My mind replayed the scene over and over, her plan, the intended embarrassment, the hidden malice. It hurt more than I expected, realizing someone could plan against me in such a personal way, but it also strengthened me. By the end of dinner, I understood something clearly: this was more than jealousy. It was a test of patience, of awareness, and of strategy. Olivia wanted to make me falter, to undermine my confidence while keeping it hidden from the rest of the family. But I wasn't going to let her. I stayed composed, careful with every word, every gesture, letting my calmness act as a shield. I could feel her frustration building, even if she tried to mask it. And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't just surviving her game, I was learning to turn the tables in ways she would never see coming. Dinner continued, and Olivia's behavior grew more obvious. She made these little comments that seemed harmless on the surface but were meant to sting. She laughed softly as she asked about my divorce, phrasing questions in a way that made my choices sound like mistakes. Then she shifted to my career, complimenting me in a backhanded way, as if my independence and success were surprising or unusual. Every word was carefully measured to make me doubt myself, and yet she acted like it was all casual conversation. I kept my smile steady and answered politely, but inside, my emotions churned. I felt the heat of frustration rising, the sting of betrayal from someone who should have been family. Olivia's smirk told me she thought she was winning, that she had already humiliated me, and it made my blood boil quietly. I reminded myself to stay calm, showing anger or distress would only give her the satisfaction she craved. The family noticed the tension, but they didn't intervene. A few exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the awkwardness, but most treated it as normal sibling rivalry or playful teasing. No one suspected the deeper malice behind Olivia's words. That was fine, I didn't need anyone to step in. I knew the real challenge wasn't convincing the family, it was protecting myself while keeping my composure intact. Olivia, confident that her plan was working, continued her subtle attacks. She made jokes about my spending habits, hinted at how I struggled emotionally after the divorce, and even suggested that my independence made me difficult to relate to. I listened carefully, weighing each word, storing each slight as a piece of information. Her overconfidence was apparent, she believed she had cornered me emotionally, but she had no idea I was already thinking several moves ahead. As the evening wore on, I began to quietly strategize. I didn't want to stoop to outright confrontation or create a scene that would only confirm Olivia's belief that she could control me. Instead, I thought about ways to turn this situation around subtly, to let her actions reveal her true nature without me ever having to raise my voice. Every glance, every comment, became part of a mental map of her character, her weaknesses, and her ego. I reminded myself that revenge didn't have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes the quiet, calculated response was far more powerful. By remaining composed, I could observe, analyze, and eventually act in a way that would let truth and consequences unfold naturally. Olivia's smirk was temporary, my patience and awareness were far more enduring. By the end of the meal, I felt a strange satisfaction. I had endured her mockery without faltering, and I had begun to see the shape of the plan I would follow to reclaim control. The tension in the room remained, but now it was mine to direct, even if only in subtle ways. For the first time that evening, I sensed that the game had shifted, that the real power wasn't with Olivia, it was quietly, steadily with me. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's actions at dinner had been more serious than I initially thought. While cleaning up some things from the night before, I noticed a napkin tucked awkwardly under a coaster on the dining table. It had faint traces of something unusual on it, a powdery residue that made my stomach turn. Suddenly, all the pieces started to fit together, the way she handled my glass, her smirk, the whispers to Jason. It wasn't just jealousy or subtle mockery, she had actively tried to harm me. Later that day, I overheard Olivia talking to a friend on the phone. Her voice carried just enough for me to catch fragments of her conversation, plans, strategies, and satisfaction at what she thought was my embarrassment. My stomach twisted, but instead of panic or anger, a strange clarity came over me. This wasn't just about defending myself, it was about showing her that manipulations had consequences, that cruelty wouldn't go unnoticed. I spent some time quietly observing her behavior throughout the day. The little slips she made, the nervous tics, the overcompensating smiles, the way she avoided certain topics, confirmed that her confidence at dinner had been a facade. She believed her plan had succeeded, but she hadn't counted on me being aware. That awareness became my strength. I started thinking carefully about a counter-revenge, but not in the way most people imagine. I didn't want chaos or public humiliation, I wanted something subtle, private, and meaningful. Something that would teach her a lesson without endangering anyone else. I pictured scenarios in my mind, each one a way to expose her manipulations quietly, letting her realize the weight of her actions. The strategy wasn't born of anger alone, it was shaped by patience, by the understanding that real power comes from control and intelligence rather than brute retaliation. As I moved through the day, I reminded myself how much I had grown emotionally. The past few years had taught me to be careful who I trusted, how to read people, and how to act with dignity even when wronged. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge, I wanted justice in its quiet, powerful form. I could feel a calm resolve settling over me, a confidence that I could navigate this situation without losing myself to anger or desperation. At home, everything seemed normal. Jason came and went, the children played, the air smelled faintly of dinner cooking, but beneath that ordinary surface, tension lingered. I walked through it with a composed exterior, smiling politely when Olivia crossed my mind, acting as if nothing had happened. In truth, I was planning each step carefully, waiting for the moment when her own missteps would become her undoing. By evening, I felt the balance shift slightly in my favor. Olivia thought she had the upper hand, but the awareness and control I had cultivated gave me an invisible advantage. The dinner had been her move, and now it was my turn to act, but quietly, thoughtfully, and with purpose. For the first time since the night began, I felt that the tide was turning. I was no longer just a target, I was someone who could shape the outcome, someone who could turn betrayal into a lesson that would not be forgotten. After the turning point, I realized that direct confrontation wasn't the way to handle Olivia. She thrived on chaos and attention, so giving her either would only feed her ego. Instead, I decided to respond with subtlety, letting her actions speak for themselves. Small, quiet moves could teach her a lesson far more effectively than anger or public drama. At the next family gathering, I began putting my plan into action. I paid attention to the seating arrangement, placing myself where I could control the flow of conversation without being obvious. Whenever Olivia tried to insert a smug remark or manipulate the discussion, I steered the conversation so her comments landed awkwardly or seemed out of place. Her words, meant to make me look small, instead came across as petty and irrelevant to the rest of the family. I didn't say a word to explain, I just let the situation unfold naturally. Watching her frustration grow quietly inside her was satisfying in a way that felt controlled and just. Jason started noticing the patterns too. He didn't need me to point anything out, he could see how Olivia's attempts to assert herself were failing. There was a moment when our eyes met across the room, and I could tell he understood, he was silently on my side. That small acknowledgement strengthened me. It wasn't about taking revenge together, it was about having an ally who could see the truth without anyone needing to explain it. I felt a strange kind of power and restraint. Every time Olivia made a move and it backfired, I didn't celebrate loudly, I remained calm and composed. I realized that the real satisfaction wasn't in humiliation or proving her wrong in front of everyone, it was in knowing that I was in control, that I could respond without letting my emotions rule me. Each small act of redirection was like a chess move, quiet but precise, forcing her into positions where her own arrogance became her weakness. Even during casual moments, I continued to watch her carefully. When she tried to dominate a conversation or make another veiled attack, I found ways to subtly shift attention, ask neutral questions, or introduce a new topic. To anyone else, it seemed normal. To Olivia, it was increasingly frustrating. She was losing influence without understanding why. By the end of the evening, I could feel the tension subtly shifting in my favor. Olivia's usual confidence was wavering, though she still tried to hide it. I, on the other hand, was calm, composed, and quietly victorious. The power of strategy and patience felt stronger than any outburst of anger ever could. I understood then that this approach wasn't just about winning this battle, it was about learning how to protect myself, maintain dignity, and respond to betrayal with intelligence. The more I exercised control, the more I realized that revenge didn't need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, the quiet, measured moves are the ones that leave the deepest mark. And for the first time, I felt that I could turn Olivia's schemes against her, not through confrontation, but through careful observation, patience, and subtle retribution. Olivia's confidence started to crack. She had expected me to falter, to blush or show irritation, but I remained calm and composed. The ease with which I deflected her jabs seemed to unsettle her more than anything I could have said. I could see it in the way her hands fidgeted, the way her smile twitched when no one was watching, and the way her eyes darted toward me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. For the first time, she realized that her plan had failed. Her frustration began to show in more drastic ways. She whispered rumors to other family members, trying to make me seem careless or manipulative. She poked at old arguments, subtly reigniting tension between people who had mostly moved on. At one point, she even tried to provoke Jason into questioning my decisions, testing the loyalty of the family around me. It was obvious she was panicking, unsure of how to regain control, and I recognized these moves as desperate attempts to salvage her failing plan. I anticipated her actions before they could cause real damage. When she tried to stir conflict with the family, I calmly shared information that highlighted inconsistencies in her stories, small details that made her attempts at manipulation obvious without me directly accusing her. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need drama, I just let the facts speak for themselves. Family members started noticing the gaps in what she said, the contradictions that made her seem less trustworthy. The room's tension shifted quietly, from uncertainty to subtle doubt about her intentions. Watching her panic quietly was almost satisfying. Every smirk she tried to maintain, every casual remark that failed to land, reminded me that arrogance can be a trap. Olivia had believed she could control everyone, but her own overconfidence had blinded her to the possibility that I was alert, prepared, and watching. Her attempts to provoke me or others only made her appear more desperate and unstable. I felt a sense of quiet power in the restraint I maintained. I didn't need to confront her directly or make anyone feel uncomfortable. The more she tried to manipulate the situation, the more it became clear to the family that her actions were intentional and unkind. I could see the shift in their expressions, the way they began to question her words without needing any explanation from me. It was a delicate victory, built on observation, patience, and strategy. By the end of the evening, Olivia's panic was apparent even to casual observers. She was trying too hard to regain composure, but the cracks in her act were visible. I, on the other hand, remained poised and confident, letting the situation unfold naturally. I realized that real satisfaction comes from control and understanding, from turning someone's own arrogance into their undoing without lifting a finger aggressively. Her failure had become my quiet triumph, and I could feel the emotional tension in the room peak as the tables subtly turned in my favor. Over the next few months, I paid close attention to Olivia's behavior. I noticed patterns, small manipulations, and moments where she tried to control conversations or spread subtle rumors. Quietly, I collected evidence, snippets of conversations I had overheard, small notes she had left behind, and observations from family members who had witnessed her sly behavior. I wasn't gathering proof to punish her aggressively, I wanted to show the truth in a way that would let her actions speak for themselves. When another family gathering came up, I knew it was the right time. The house was filled with the usual chatter and laughter, but I felt a quiet focus, a sense that this evening could finally bring clarity. I stayed calm, composed, and observant, letting the flow of conversation continue naturally while I waited for the right moment. I began to tell a story to the group, framing it as a personal reflection on recent events, mistakes, and misunderstandings. I spoke about someone close who had tried to manipulate situations, sow distrust, and create chaos, all without naming Olivia directly. I described scenarios that mirrored exactly what had happened at past gatherings, using examples that were clear enough for those paying attention to recognize the truth. I kept my tone calm, measured, and factual, never raising my voice or letting anger creep in. As I spoke, I noticed subtle changes in Olivia. Her confident posture faltered, and she began fidgeting, glancing around to see if others were catching on. The expressions of family members shifted too, small looks of realization, raised eyebrows, and quiet whispers indicated that they were beginning to see the patterns themselves. She tried to laugh nervously, to make a joke, but it felt forced and hollow. The confidence she had worn like armor for months was slipping away. I continued carefully, letting the details accumulate naturally. Each story I shared highlighted her manipulations without turning it into a direct confrontation. The evidence of her behavior, the inconsistencies, the whispers, the little attempts at control, became undeniable. Olivia's cheeks flushed slightly, and she shifted in her seat, defensive and embarrassed. There was no yelling, no accusations, no dramatic showdown, just a clear presentation of truth that anyone could understand. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted. The family began to see her actions for what they were, and the balance of perception moved quietly but firmly in my favor. I felt a sense of emotional relief and catharsis, not from hurting Olivia, but from watching the truth emerge naturally. It was satisfying to see her own choices and arrogance unravel in front of everyone without me needing to create conflict or escalate tensions. For the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of control and closure. The truth had spoken for itself, and I didn't have to say a single harsh word to make it clear. Olivia's confidence was shattered, and I had achieved justice in the quietest, most powerful way possible. A few days after the family gathering, Olivia approached me quietly. Her face looked tense, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something hesitant and uneasy. She started speaking in a low, careful voice, claiming that her jealousy and insecurity had driven her actions. She admitted she had tried to manipulate situations to make herself look better and confessed that she had crossed lines she shouldn't have. Her words were awkward, almost forced, but there was a glimmer of sincerity underneath the nervousness. I listened carefully. I didn't interrupt, I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't let her apology catch me off guard. Inside, I was aware of all she had done, all the subtle ways she had tried to undermine me, and how easily things could have gone differently if I hadn't been vigilant. But I also recognized that this apology, however uncomfortable, was a small step toward accountability. My calm, measured responses showed that I wasn't intimidated, that I wasn't going to react with anger, and that I was in control of my emotions. I decided in that moment to forgive, but not to forget. Forgiveness, for me, didn't mean ignoring the betrayal or pretending it hadn't happened. It meant acknowledging her apology, taking the power away from anger, and moving forward in a way that protected myself. I wanted to make sure she understood that any attempt to harm or manipulate me in the future would be noticed and addressed. I expressed this calmly, speaking firmly but without malice, letting her know that I valued honesty and respect above all else. The act of forgiving without losing my own boundaries gave me a strong sense of emotional closure. I realized that the strength I had gained from this experience wasn't just about defending myself, it was about understanding my own limits, standing up for myself without aggression, and knowing that I could navigate difficult family dynamics with dignity. The shift in my perspective made me feel more confident, more resilient, and more in control of my life. I also noticed a subtle change in the family's behavior. They had seen Olivia's actions, my composed response, and the careful way I handled the situation. There was a quiet respect toward me that hadn't been there before. Loyalty, trust, and acknowledgement seemed to subtly shift, not in a dramatic way, but in small gestures and unspoken understanding. Jason's quiet support continued, and other family members began including me more genuinely in conversations, recognizing my patience and emotional intelligence. By the end of the conversation, Olivia had stepped back, visibly humbled. I felt a sense of relief, knowing that I had maintained my integrity while allowing her a chance to make amends. The balance had shifted in a quiet but undeniable way. I walked away from the interaction feeling stronger, empowered, and certain that I could face any future challenge with the same calm and measured approach, knowing that boundaries, awareness, and patience were far more powerful than anger or retaliation. Life began to settle into a calm rhythm after the tensions with Olivia. Family gatherings became easier, and I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in months. The quiet battles, the careful observation, and the subtle strategies had all paid off, and I could finally move forward with dignity. I focused on my work, my home, and the relationships that truly mattered, letting the past remain a lesson rather than a burden. Olivia, on the other hand, had become more aware of her missteps. She seemed cautious in her interactions, no longer attempting to assert control or manipulate conversations. There were small consequences she couldn't ignore. Family members who had once sided with her now approached her with skepticism, and invitations that had once been casual and frequent became less so. She wasn't ostracized, but she was socially aware that trust had been affected and that her behavior had cost her credibility. I didn't need to gloat or point it out. Watching her realize her mistakes quietly was enough. I took subtle satisfaction in knowing that her arrogance and manipulations had lost their power, and that I had achieved this without ever stooping to cruelty. The victories were small but meaningful, the smiles of understanding from family members, the respect in Jason's eyes, and the knowledge that I had maintained my integrity throughout everything. My own life moved forward in ways that felt balanced and strong. I noticed the little things, family members asking for my opinion on matters they had once debated with Olivia, being included in conversations with more genuine attention, and seeing my calm and patience recognized without me needing to announce it. These subtle shifts reflected the quiet revenge I had achieved, not through malice, but through strategy, composure, and consistency. I began to see the larger lesson in all of this. True empowerment didn't come from confrontation or revenge for revenge's sake. It came from maintaining self-respect, protecting your dignity, and responding to betrayal with intelligence rather than anger. The past months had been challenging, but they had strengthened me, teaching patience, awareness, and the power of quiet action. Even in ordinary moments, I felt the difference. Family dinners were warmer, the tension lighter, and I carried myself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. I had faced manipulation, betrayal, and jealousy, and had emerged not only unbroken but wiser. The small, subtle victories added up, creating a life where respect and understanding were restored, and where I could thrive without fear of sabotage or cruelty. By the time I reflected on everything, I realized I felt victorious without ever having to hurt anyone. I hadn't created drama, humiliated anyone, or lowered myself to aggression. Instead, I had reclaimed control, reinforced boundaries, and restored harmony in a way that was entirely my own. The quiet revenge had been the most satisfying, leaving me stronger, empowered, and at peace. Looking back on everything, I realized how much the past months had changed me. The betrayal I experienced from Olivia cut deeper than I expected at first, but it also taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. I learned to recognize subtle manipulation, to trust my instincts, and to act with care rather than letting anger control me. Every step of restraint, every moment I observed before reacting, had strengthened me more than any confrontation could have. I understood that real power didn't come from lashing out or getting revenge just for the sake of it. It came from staying composed when others tried to provoke you, from thinking ahead, and from acting strategically when it truly mattered. Olivia had expected me to falter, to lose my calm, or to respond in a way that gave her control, but by holding myself steady, I had not only protected myself, I had turned this situation around without lowering my standards or dignity. Family relationships began to mend, though cautiously. Some members had been unsure who to trust, but over time, they saw the patterns clearly and began to respect my patience and composure. I became more aware of who my true allies were, and I cherished those connections. Jason's quiet support remained a constant, and even others who had once been distracted by Olivia's schemes now looked to me with understanding and trust. The small, genuine moments of connection felt more rewarding than any dramatic victory could have. I often reflected on the quiet triumphs, the times I redirected Olivia's manipulations, stayed calm during tense conversations, and let the truth reveal itself without me needing to speak harsh words. Those moments, though subtle, carried more weight than any loud argument or public confrontation ever could. They reminded me that integrity and intelligence are far more powerful than ego-driven revenge. In my own life, I felt a renewed sense of control and peace. I didn't have to fear hidden schemes or subtle attacks anymore because I had learned to observe, anticipate, and respond thoughtfully. That awareness gave me freedom and confidence, allowing me to enjoy family gatherings and personal moments without anxiety or suspicion. I realized that my patience and restraint had not only protected me, they had allowed me to grow stronger and wiser. Even now, when I think about that night and what Olivia had tried to do, I feel a quiet satisfaction. I didn't need to confront her with anger, humiliate her, or make a scene. Everything had unfolded naturally, and the truth had revealed itself. I felt victorious, but not in a way that came from cruelty or resentment. She thought I didn't see what she put in my drink, but in the end, I didn't need to. The truth had already won.